There are clearly manifest problems on both the right and the left of politics. But I focus on critiques of the left for two main reasons. One is that they simply get away with much more. They're given leeway that's never extended to the right. So I feel it's important to address that balance by turning the spotlight on them. Want an example? Well, every single year, up to 30,000 people march through London, and many other cities, waving hammer and sickle banners and portraits of Stalin, Lenin and Mao. Yet this doesn't even cause a ripple, and you might never have heard that it happens. But if a crowd marched carrying swastikas and pictures of Hitler just once, the world would erupt. You would definitely hear about that, and it would never be forgotten. So it's important to highlight the fact that the left gets away with behaviour that the right never would. And this brings us to my second motivation. It's because of this leeway that the left is frequently guilty of worse crimes. The last century has seen a swathe of left-wing tyrants inflict unimaginable suffering on people across the globe. And we're currently living under a sort of cultural tyranny. It's remarkable that the left has followed centuries of bloodshed and violence to arrive at the bullying and censorious culture of today, while still swayed by the simplistic idea that the left is all good and the right all bad. But that's where we are. The far left are bullying their rivals, censoring and cancelling them, advancing their own ideology while spreading hate and lies about their opposition, and their cultural reach is making this a most uneven fight. The left holds a slight edge in media reach, but utterly dominates the arts, the BBC, Hollywood, the education sector, and the tech giants of Silicon Valley. Now, I've put out a number of films on the appalling bias of Twitter, but I'd like to turn the spotlight on Wikipedia, the online encyclopedia which is guilty of some truly worrying behaviour. For Wikipedia has an incipient political bias writ through every page. Peter Hitchens went public with the difficulty of being a right-leaning contributor to the site. Every entry he made was immediately amended by an army of leftist editors, and he was eventually hauled before a Maoist panel, ordered to repent for crimes he had not committed before any editorial rights would be restored. He quit instead, and the left-wing dominance that destroys any pretence to objectivity on that site is plain for all to see. In its page describing the right wing, Wikipedia defines it as a view that certain social orders and hierarchies are inevitable, natural, normal, or desirable. It claims it sought a return to aristocracy, has distrusted intellectuals, favoured an aggressive form of nationalism, and proposed anti-immigration policies and implicit racism. Yet the left is defined as supporting social equality and egalitarianism, concern for the disadvantaged, a critique of social hierarchy, and a belief in unjustified inequalities that need to be abolished. Both descriptions are markedly distorted, airbrushing the flaws of the left while magnifying those of the right. It's an appraisal as balanced as the rats, snails, puppy dogs' tails versus sugar and spice and all things nice variety. And the site is absolutely awash with grossly misleading interpretations of this sort. Douglas Murray is one of the most impressive and balanced political commentators of our age. Yet his Wikipedia page opens by claiming that he has been linked to far-right political ideologies and accused of promoting far-right conspiracy theories while being Islamophobic. Wikipedia reports these allegations as though they are fact, while offering no contradictory evidence at all. Yet Sean King, a race-baiting provocateur who has promoted and defended violence, and who eschews analysis in favour of hysteria, is lauded for using social media to promote social justice causes, and for supporting progressive candidates running for district attorney offices. It's a similar story with news services. BuzzFeed is described as left-leaning, a global media and technology company providing coverage on a variety of topics, including politics and business, though a brief mention does admit it is regarded as unreliable. But Vox is simply described as being noted for its concept of explanatory journalism, while described as left of centre and progressive. But it's a rather different story with the Daily Wire. That is criticised for promoting misinformation. Wikipedia claims that the Daily Wire has a tendency to share stories that are taken out of context or not verified, severely violates basic standards of credibility and transparency, often misstates facts to advance partisan opinion, frequently publishes false and misleading information, and is inaccurate and misleading. And the same applies to print media. The New York Times is described as the newspaper of record, carrying all the news that's fit to print, while the Washington Post is lauded for exposing the Watergate scandal and for winning 69 Pulitzer Prizes. The Guardian is also credited with being founded to safeguard journalistic freedom and liberal values, and is credited as being a highly trusted periodical. But the Daily Mail is dismissed for its unreliability and widely criticised for its printing of sensationalist and inaccurate scare stories of science and medical research. CNN is described as being known for its dramatic live coverage and for its efforts to be non-partisan, while Fox News is condemned for practising biased reporting in favour of the Republican Party and criticised as being detrimental to the integrity of news overall, providing propaganda and a feedback loop for Donald Trump. Now, it's not my position to defend Fox or the Daily Mail, but CNN, The Guardian and the New York Times are certainly no better. And the issue here is with Wikipedia, because you may be starting to detect a bit of a pattern. Now, Wikipedia does have its uses. On numerous facts and figures, it's very good, and it's a useful reference guide in lots of ways, if you're awake to its terrible flaws. Because the biggest problem with Wikipedia isn't the slanted and distorted material they put in, it's the stuff they leave out. And this flaw has an incipient political bias too, whitewashing the faults of numerous leftist icons. The page on the French revolutionary, Jean-Paul Marat for instance, gives the impression that he was an egalitarian crusader, one closer to the revolutionary propaganda of the Jacobins than the sordid reality. Any mentions of his bigoted hatred and continual exhortations to violence, his desire to guillotine 100,000 of his political rivals, are conspicuous by their absence. The section on Charles Fourier, one of the pioneers of socialism, notes his tolerance towards women and homosexuals, but makes no mention of his rabid anti-Semitism or his belief that the introduction of socialism would turn lions vegetarian, would lead to 6 moons orbiting the Earth, and would turn the sea to lemonade. Beliefs which you might think would be interesting enough to warrant inclusion. The article on Emily Davison admits any discussion of the bombs planted by the suffragette, while that on Edgar Snow claims that he penned the first true account of Maoist China. It only reports Chinese and wholly favourable reactions to his career, sources which give no impression of the deeply troubling nature of his work as the propagandist of Mao's murderous regime. Elaine Brown's page makes no mention of her violent history with the Black Panthers, or her implication in the murder of Betty Van Patter. It prefers to focus on her community service, and concludes that she left the movement over its sexism and patriarchy. The entry for Vanessa Redgrave paints her as an altruistic activist, but avoids any mention of her defence of the serial rapist Jerry Healy, and her notorious bullying role in the Workers' Revolutionary Party. And the page on the great abolitionist of the slave trade, William Wilberforce, glosses over his allegiance to the Tory party. The Wikipedia article on cultural Marxism was simply deleted and shifted to a section on the Frankfurt School's page. There, it was simply dismissed as a right-wing conspiracy theory. A move that was cultural Marxism in action. But the worst example of all may well be Wikipedia's entry on Patrick Crusius, the spree killer who struck El Paso, Texas in 2019. While he targeted immigrants and desired some form of racial segregation, Crusius was a radical environmentalist who was alarmed at population growth. He was repelled by elites, the power of corporations, and the dreadful waste of consumer culture, all markedly left-wing positions. Crusius even left a manifesto specifying that Donald Trump's rhetoric played no part in his outrage. He confirmed that some people will blame the president or certain presidential candidates for the attack. This is not the case. I know that the media will probably call me a white supremacist anyway and blame Trump's rhetoric. The media is infamous for fake news. Their reaction to this attack will likely just confirm that. And he was entirely correct. The media did do that. And Wikipedia still does. Despite the easily available nature of his manifesto, Wikipedia outright lies about Crusius and his aims. They simply don't mention any of the deeply left-wing aspects of his manifesto. And they flat out call him a white nationalist and far-right conspiracy theorist who uses language about immigrants similar to that used by US President Donald Trump. This then largely defines Wikipedia. A quite shocking blend of omissions, distortions, and flat-out lies. The site is effectively an organ of propaganda, tasked with advancing a narrow political vision which its authors imagine to be objective reality. But their own incipient bias and close-minded approach prevents them from perceiving the prejudice that infects their work, and which makes their whole endeavour largely worthless. You should approach the online encyclopedia with caution, and take it with a huge grain of salt. If you've enjoyed this film, please like and subscribe. And if you're interested in these topics, I've written 2 books which go into them in extensive detail. They're called The Tyranny of the Left, and they're available on the links below. Please feel free to pick them up and let me know what you think. Thank you.